not a new theme for us. As Unilever, we've made pretty good progress in a number of areas. I think gender is the one where I'm really proud of the progress Unilever has made over time. Back in 2010, Unilever committed to 50% women at management level. At the time, that seemed like a really crazy target because there was only about 30% back then. But over 10 years, by being so public about it and by just working away at it, we actually achieved that in 2020. So we now have 50% female managers, which is great.
I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our Rise to Leadership podcast, a weekly show that explores topics that matter while sharing stories of inspiring leaders who are creating positive social change in the areas of diversity, inclusion, and equity to help you learn from their wisdom, challenges, and successes. Today's episode will feature a live conversation with Hanneke Faber, President, Global Foods and Refreshments at Unilever. We will discuss the backstory behind Unilever's recent commitments, her journey to the top, and how she's leading the change towards a more inclusive and equitable world. You know, from so many studies, so many organizations make commitments without achieving them. Take, for example, gender equality. With all the yearly commitments made by corporate leaders, the World Economic Forum still records that it will take 99.5 years to close the gender gap. We can't wait for that. So when I saw the 2021 commitments released by Unilever, I was excited. They are ambitious, and somehow I started wondering, how are they going to achieve this? I feel there's something they know that we all need to learn from, and I would like to hear about it. In my curiosity, I have invited Hanneke Faber to share with us the backstory. But first, let me formally introduce Hanneke. Hanneke Faber is the President, Global Foods and Refreshments Unilever, responsible for Unilever's ice cream, tea, and food categories globally, including Unilever Food Solutions. Hanneke joined Unilever in 2018 as the President of Europe and an executive member of Unilever. Previously, she worked as the Chief Commercial Officer of Ahold and later as Chief E-commerce and Innovation Officer and member of the Executive Committee of Royal Ahold Delhaize, where she played a pivotal role in accelerating the company's e-commerce business. Hanneke started her career at Procter & Gamble, where she became Vice President and global leader of 3 of P&G's top brands in over 180 countries. Hanneke also holds a non-executive role at Bayer. She's a passionate advocate of diversity and inclusion in the workplace and is on the advisory board for retail and CPG-focused organization called LEAD. Hanneke joins me now on the studio.
Hi, Ebere.
Hanneke, welcome.
Hi, Ebere. It's nice to see you.
I'm so thrilled to have you here.
Thank you. It's really fun to be here.
Thank you. So as we get ready to celebrate women during International Women's Day, I would like to celebrate you for all your achievements and for being ranked number 23 of the 50 most powerful women internationally, according to Fortune. That's a big plus for all of us. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So before I ask you, about leadership, about your leadership stories, I'd like to talk about the recent commitments released by Unilever, which you shared on your LinkedIn page. First, I'm going to play the Unilever commitment video for our audience. Wow. Wow, they are bold, they are ambitious. What is behind these commitments? And talk me through how you plan to achieve them.
Yeah, great question. So what's behind the commitments? We really, as a leadership team at Unilever, believe that climate change and social inequality are really the two biggest issues of our time. And as a big company, we really have a responsibility to contribute to solving those two problems. So last year, we came out with a number of long-term commitment around climate and nature, plastic, some of the areas on environmental sustainability. And then indeed in January, as you just showed, we also came out with a set of commitments that are more about the social inequality problem. And what's behind those? I think over the years, this is not a new theme for us. As Unilever, we've made pretty good progress in a number of areas. I think gender is the one where I'm really proud of the progress Unilever has made over time. Back in 2010, Unilever committed to 50% women at management level. At the time, that seemed like a really crazy target because there was only about 30% back then. But over 10 years, by being so public about it and by just working away at it, we actually achieved that in 2020. So we now have 50% female managers, which is great. So I would say gender is one area where we've made good progress. But there was a number of other areas that we talked about as a leadership team where we simply have to make more progress. Those were living wage, other underrepresented groups, so not just gender, but very much also people of color, for example, and preparing young people for the future. So those were kind of three big areas where we felt we had to do more, and hence our new commitments that include a living wage by 2030 for everyone who supplies goods and services directly to Unilever. So not just our own employees where we pay everyone a living wage today, but the much broader ecosystem of farmers, of suppliers who work with us. It's a really tricky one because, it's expensive. B, it requires lots of partnerships, but it's really, really important because poverty is a scourge. So living wage is one. The second one, underrepresented groups. We haven't done well enough on representation of people of color in our own employee population, but very much also with our suppliers. So we've committed to spend 2 billion euros with suppliers from underrepresented communities. Again, to have an impact beyond just our own people. And finally, young people, the world changes so fast that to be ready for what tomorrow brings is hard these days. You don't really know what you should tell your kids to go study in college because God knows in 10 years, the jobs will be different. So we've committed to equipping 10 million young people around the world with essential skills for employability going forward. Which again is a big, scary target. We're not quite sure yet how we'll do it. It's going to be about growing our apprenticeships, working with partner organizations to provide work experience opportunities for kids, working with our suppliers and distributors to provide opportunities. So lots to do, but hopefully that provides a little bit of background. We feel really good about what we've done in gender, but certainly there's been other areas where we feel we must do more.
Well, congratulations for what you've done, especially in the areas you have already made progress. And you said something like you have achieved, your commitment towards 50% gender balance. And you mentioned that, you were public about it and you worked hard to achieve that. What specifically did you do so that other companies who are also struggling with gender parity can, learn from your tips?
Yeah, great question. So I and my colleagues at Unilever, we're big believers in public target setting. When you say it out in the open, not only does that put pressure on you to actually go and do it, but it also creates belief inside the organization that you can actually do it. And we set targets for our business, so why not for things like gender equality? So that worked really well for us when we did it back in 2010, and we then reported every year on progress. So there was just a lot of pressure on us to actually do it. And we did it, which is great. So what I try to do is work together with other organizations, businesses in networks like the LEAD network, which is Leading Executives Advancing Diversity's European network, Catalyst in the US, and share some of those examples, and see if we can convince other companies to also measure what they treasure, because you can't just talk about diversity. You have to set goals and you have to be public about those, I think, if you want to really be serious about them. So that's one way to do it. Definitely working through networks and partnerships to share some of our experience, but to also learn from others, because of course there's a number of other great companies and organizations that are also doing really, really well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's exciting. And I hope that people who are listening to us can also pick up some tips around that. But, you mentioned that in terms of underrepresented groups, Unilever hasn't done great, and that becomes your strategic priority this year. But I was missing something in terms of your workforce. How are you making your workforce more diverse and inclusive for people of color and for people of ethnic minorities, especially in Europe? Why I'm asking this is that I know everybody's trying to do better. I know everybody's still trying to progress and get there. So what progress have you made, and what obstacles have you had to overcome, or that is still there that you need to overcome?
Yeah, very good question. So I would say we haven't done well enough on people of color anywhere, really. So a few things that we've recently done, kind of woken up by Black Lives Matter, of course, like everyone else. So the first one is to set ourselves a goal that our organizations have to reflect the local communities that they operate in. Because what people of color means in the United States is very different from what it means in India or in Pakistan. So we're in 190 countries. So it's very important that we are locally sensitive, but we should reflect the makeup of the local population wherever we operate. It's not, it's just not the same everywhere. But that said, in a place like Holland, in the UK, we're underrepresented with Black people. So we need to boost our representation there. The same is true in South Africa. The same is true in the United States. If I go to the European continent, we're underrepresented in people with a migration background, mostly from Turkey or North Africa, which are large communities in places like Holland, France, Germany. And again, we're underrepresented. So that would be our focus in those markets. So it's not one size fits all, but we have set ourselves a goal that, our workforce should reflect the makeup of the community that we operate in. And then how do we do that? First of all, recruiting. We have to be a lot more focused on recruiting equitably. So not just, people who look like ourselves. And second, once you recruit, inclusion is also critical. And there's power in numbers. I've seen that with gender. If you're the only woman in a team, it's much harder than when you're, 3 out of 8. And the same is true for other underrepresented groups. There's really power in numbers, so we need to quickly get to numbers, and then that, immediately tends to lead to inclusion as well.
Wow, thank you so much for your honesty and openness. I guess I'll have to come back to you by the end of the year to see the new commitments you're making to close this gap. Thank you so much, Hanneke. And now I want to come to your leadership growth. You joined as President Unilever Europe and a Unilever executive member in 2018. And within a year, you became the global president, Foods and Refreshment, and also for Unilever Food Solutions. Please, how did you get here? What would you say contributed to your rise?
Well, that move specifically was a lateral move, I would say. We have presidents for regions and we have presidents for divisions. So I just moved jobs. We had a new CEO and things kind of moved around, which is great. I love both jobs. I loved my regional president job. I love the job that I'm doing now to lead the global foods business. So both are great. Maybe, if I just zoom out of what got me here, say, first of all, a lot of luck. You can't attribute most of what happens in life to yourself, I believe. So very often I was in the right place at the right time. I'm lucky that I, had the chance to have a good education. I'm lucky that I have a super supportive husband and kids. Because for my job, we've had to move around a lot. We moved countries 5 times. So you have to, be lucky in that you have a support team, i.e. the rest of your family that, wants to do that and is able to do that. Because not all kids are able to do that. So I just feel very, very lucky, honestly. And then I probably did a few things right along the way, but but luck plays a big role.
Wow. Oh, I still want to hear more here because as women, we want to close the gender leadership gap. And so many women are aspiring to get to top leadership. And of course, it's not all rosy at all. And so I like to ask, what has been the biggest obstacles you faced along your leadership journey, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Maybe one vulnerable moment, what?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh, there's been many. But I think in the big picture, there's a couple of things that, are required, I think, to get to the big jobs that weren't necessarily intuitive for me. So first of all, growing up in Holland's kind of a weird place. We think of it as very progressive and tolerant, but most women in Holland, vast majority, work part-time. So they choose to work 3 days, 4 days a week, which is great, which gives them more time for their families, for their personal interests. But it's hard to do the job that I do now, and many of the jobs that I've done part-time. So when I was younger and had my babies, the number of times that I was asked, how many hours a week do you work? And people expecting the answer of, 30, 32 or 24. And when I would say, well, officially 40, but probably 50 or 60.
Wow.
That's a choice. And it's a choice I made early on that I enjoyed work a lot. I also loved my kids, but I felt I could work full time and do a good job as a mom and a wife. So I think a lot of women, especially here in Northern Europe, early on think they can't because society kind of tells them they can't and they should work part-time when their kids are young, I would say, you make that choice. Of course, if you want to do that, that's great, but you make the choice. Don't feel like you must do that. I certainly, am really happy now that my kids are teenagers and in their early 20s, the oldest, that I did keep working full time because it allowed me to get to where I am now. So I'd say that would be one. And the second one was, in big multinationals, to make a career, you do have to move countries because you can't run a big multinational business if you've spent or it's very difficult if you've spent your entire career in one place. So again, that's not always easy for women because you have a family often that, needs to come along. So like I said before, I'm lucky that I have a very flexible husband who's always up for the adventure. And then I have kids who were able to adapt and actually liked it. So I think those are two big things. But what I would tell young women is, again, don't just assume that A, you can't work full time, and B, you will never be able to move to another country. I'm so delighted that we moved around. Such an enriching experience. And I learned so much as a leader from working in different countries. So don't assume anything. Just go for it when the time comes.
Wow, thank you so much for those nuggets. What I like about it is the fact that you said it's a choice. We can make the choice. And of course, we have our vision. We know what we want out of our careers. We can make that choice. And then we shouldn't be afraid to move around. Thanks for sharing that. It's exciting. Now let me bring you back to, next week, March 8th, is coming up, the International Women's Day. So as the world is set to celebrate us women, I believe there's a lot that women who aspire to lead can also learn from you, not just about leadership, but also about self-care, well-being, balance, work-life integration. But of course, studies have shown that companies with women in leadership are 1.4 times more likely to produce sustained, profitable growth. And I want to say that you are a great example of that because under your leadership, Unilever is targeting 1 billion euros in sales of plant-based meat and dairy alternatives within the next 5 to 7 years. So women bring a lot of values on every table. Yet women are underrepresented in top leadership in almost every sector of the economy. My question for you is, I'm interested in knowing what you've noticed in workplaces, especially, that stops professional women from rising to top leadership positions, and what can women do to change this situation?
Yeah. So of course, it always starts with ourselves. So, some of the things I just mentioned about, working hard, working full time, being willing to, take maybe some riskier moves in your career, like moving to another country. Those are things that, women and men, if they want to get ahead, will need to do. I do think there's some other structural things that we need to do for women. Women for women and men for women, very importantly. So sponsorship, very, very important. Leaning in on female appointments, not just picking someone who looks like what you think, a CEO looks like, i.e. a white male, but leaning in on some different appointments. And I'm excited. My leadership team now for the Foods and Refreshments division at Unilever is perfectly 50-50 male, female. It works better, as you say. So that's what we try to do. So sponsorship is important. Policies are also important. So I've been really lucky to work for a number of great companies, Procter & Gamble, Ahold Delhaize, now Unilever, that just had the right policies, whether it was, flexible working for women or men when they needed it. Paternity leave, really important that men also can take time off when they first have babies. and other policies to just help working parents, especially because that's a time where many parents, feel like they must take a step back. So policies are important. And the final thing I think that we can do for women as well is networking. Again, I think there's power in numbers. So even a podcast like today, where we get together and we talk about these things, to have a network, someone who's got your back, someone that you can just have a cup of coffee with or a glass of wine and, talk about some of the things that you're facing. And some of that can be informal, but I think formal networks are really important as well. So that's why I just mentioned Lead and Catalyst. Those are great networks for women in this case. And again, at Unilever, we're also strengthening our networks for people of color, because that's another just important networking opportunity. Same, by the way, for LGBTQI. Again, we have a really great network in Unilever for that group. When you're underrepresented, there's power in numbers.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And another question I want to ask you is, as leaders, we often tend not to prioritize our self-care and well-being. And many working women in particular have struggled during the lockdown with managing family responsibilities and work demands. How have you successfully done this? And what tips can you offer to our audience who may find themselves in this situation?
Yeah, great question. And again, I would say, first of all, I count myself a bit lucky, because in the lockdown, my usual work life has me traveling at least 3 days a week. And my last year's work life has been me sitting here at this table. So for me, actually, the stress of, the travel, it made my life, my work-life balance actually a little better because I didn't have all the travel. Second reason I say I'm lucky is my kids are a bit older. I honestly, I don't know how some of my colleagues do it with younger kids that they had to homeschool for many, many months. Again, I have teenagers who are pretty self-reliant when it comes to their homeschooling. But that said, still, this is tough on all of us. And one of the things that's really helped me, because my life now is like, I start at 8 a.m. and I can go on till midnight with, Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. And
like this one.
Yeah. So one of the things that's helped me is every day around like 5:36, I grab whoever's willing in my household, my husband, one of my kids, all of my kids, and we do an exercise video. This sounds super corny, but we go, living room, or if the weather's good and it's daylight, we go out in the backyard and we just, we do an exercise video. And it's great because after that, like, my head clears and, we'll have dinner after that. Maybe I'll work a bit more after that, but it's just a great clearing of the head. And it's a bit of self-care as well because it's exercise. Yeah. So that's been good for me. But I think we all need our little coping mechanisms to get through this time.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that. I'll start doing that myself. Before I ask you the last question, and also for our audience watching, if you have any question for Hanneke, just type it on the chat. I will pick up one or two. But first, I want to really congratulate you and Unilever, your team, for being a purpose-driven organization. Almost everything I read about Unilever focuses on making a positive impact, such as positive nutrition, reducing food waste, a little less meat, making a difference for the planet, and doing well by doing good. I'm curious, what new campaign are you promoting and how can we follow it?
Oh, wow. Oh, we're doing so much exciting stuff. So I'll give you a few of my favorites. So we're launching just right now a new Knorr bouillon, and we're the biggest seller of bouillon and stock and soups in the world, with no salt, 0 salts, which I didn't think that was possible, that you could do a stock with 0 salts, but that's coming out this week and it's incredibly tasty. Our technology team did an incredible job working with spices, herbs, and vegetables to create a really tasty bouillon. So that's a nice example of positive nutrition, because many of us just consume way too much salt. And then the other thing I'll tell you that's a favorite of mine is the new Hellmann's campaign. It's called Make Taste, Not Waste. We debuted it on the Super Bowl just last month. And it's all about, the world wastes way too much food. 1/3 of all food that gets produced is actually thrown away. And Hellmann's has taken that up as a cause. And of course, everything is better with mayonnaise. So you have all these things in your fridge that you don't know what to do with. And Hellmann's provides recipes and a really fun campaign, Make Taste, Not Waste, about how we can all do our bit to reduce food waste.
I started eating Knorr cubes since maybe I was 1 year old, or since I started eating. So I'm excited to know that, it's you're doing it, you're now preparing it without salt. So thanks so much. I have a question here from a participant. Please, before I get there, I would first like to, I always like to end by asking, what 3 things would you say contributed to your leadership growth? Just 3 things, which is a tip I can share on social media.
Wow. Well, I'm thankful. I've had great bosses and role models. So that would be a first. People that sponsored me, people that lent into me. So that's one. I think a second thing that I always say is we don't do lawns. And what I mean with that is, we delegate. So I order my groceries at albertheijn.nl. I don't spend 3 hours on a Saturday in the grocery store, and I have someone else mow my lawn so that I have time for the things that matter. And the final thing I would say is something I learned early on at Procter & Gamble. So, I would fret over things, and someone said to me, listen, there's hardly ever a mascara emergency. I was working on cosmetics at the time. And it's true. You know what? Apart from really bad things that happen with people, there really are few emergencies. We're selling mascara in this case, not world peace. So when something goes wrong, you learn from it and you move on. And the next time you don't make that mistake again. So that's been another good life lesson for me, that there's hardly ever a mascara emergency.
Wow, thank you for sharing. Maybe I'll just show this question, just one.
Sure.
Somebody, Isioma, is saying, what opportunities exist for women now with the pandemic on terms of cross-country experience? Do we really need to move countries now to get a global leadership experience, or the focus could be on a global portfolio?
Yeah, I think moving now is really, really difficult in the pandemic, as we've all experienced. I'm sure, traveling now is virtually impossible. So also moving now is very, very hard. I've had people doing roles from various places that they're not really supposed to be in. They were supposed to be somewhere else, but they're doing it from wherever they were. So I think for the time being, I wouldn't sweat it. For the time being, we can do our jobs from anywhere. But I do think in the midterm, when hopefully this pandemic has subsided, I do think it's important to be in the place that you're working in and trying to build a business in, because there's no substitute for sitting in someone's home and hearing about her concerns, whether it's about cooking or washing her hair. There's no substitute for sitting in the same room with the customer, being in a store, or speaking with the government live. All those things are impossible now. So we shouldn't sweat them now. We do what we can. We use our digital tools. But I do think in the midterm, working like this forever and pretending you're doing a global or a role in another country, you're probably not going to be as effective as others who are moving. But in the short term, here we are, and that's fine, and we make the best of it.
Wow. Thank you so much. I've seen a lot of comments. People are excited about this interview with you, Hanneke. Thank you for joining me. And to all our viewers and listeners, thanks for tuning in. See you next Wednesday when I will be interviewing another top executive in the food sector, and we will be discussing the importance of self-awareness in leadership and how he's using his position to drive inclusion and equity. So,
thank you.